All right, welcome to Autofocus, the podcast, episode 1, starting somewhere. How was that, Ryan? What do you think?
Perfect.
All right, should I say my name?
Yes, I think so.
I'm Michael Wheaton.
I'm Ryan Scard.
Well, we are a literary magazine at the moment. We're also, I supposedly, a podcast now, and we're dedicated entirely to autobiographical writing. So I'm thinking maybe, I don't know, for this episode, we might talk something about autobiographical writing. What do you think?
I'm down.
Okay.
First things first.
Okay.
With the idea of nonfiction and autobiography, whatever, hand in hand, right?
Sure.
What are you drawn to more than others in that category?
Of autobiographical nonfiction?
Yeah, like what do you gravitate towards more? Like hybrid forms, poetic, lyric essay, memoir, like what's your mindset?
I tend to love anything done in a somewhat collage form. Not that I'm anti-narrative, really. I love narrative. We've published narrative.
Yeah.
But I tend to maybe gravitate toward pieces that are a little more fragmentary. And then the parts kind of, as the piece progresses, comes and makes some kind of whole that maybe you didn't expect entirely.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of like the work of, David Shields, for instance. Some of those, a couple Maggie Nelson books do that.
Oh yeah.
Amy Fusselman, her work is I mean, there's different levels of fragmentary. Some do like fragment on the level of like the paragraph, and then some do it on like the little tiny mini essays within. Yeah, I just tend to gravitate towards stuff like that, at least at the moment. What about you?
Yeah, well, and then you even see like some like lineated things thrown in there. Like if you wanted to just drop like a poem halfway through, which I'm like,
one of my favorite moves.
Yeah, absolutely. Do it well, and it's great.
Just throw a poem in.
Yeah, why not? Yeah, no, I totally get that.
What about you?
I would say same. I think because my background is in solid mix of poetry and nonfiction, that's kind of a natural thing for me to look at. But I'm just such a sucker for the image. Like as simple as that sounds, like if there's like a solid simile on the line, it's game over.
I know that about you because I've read some of your writing and like, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, as you know, with me, I sometimes delete similes when I see them in people's work and in my own work. And it's not because I don't like similes. It's just because I think like when there is one, it needs to do so much work.
Yeah.
What do you think of that? Because we're both editing, right, this magazine, so we do it together. But we do have as much of it. So we have overlapping sensibilities. We also have, I don't know, other sensibility.
Yeah, I like it reminds me too, like with my students, like I'm just like, make it as unique and interesting and creative and from your own perspective as possible. Like it can reveal more than just a comparison to, in my mind, tonally to like, the character whoever's going through it. So I feel like the image is so strong, and when it becomes so subtle and almost like microscopic, when you take something big and then you kind of narrow it in the focus more and more and more, that's when it really stands out.
I like it.
So, yeah.
Well, what's one thing you read recently that maybe does that or doesn't do that, and or something?
Funny you should ask.
Yes, what's the last thing?
Okay, so first of all, before I even tell you the title, the subtitle to this is an essay in poems, which is exactly what it described as up my alley. The Donkey Elegies, Nicole Brown. That's Nickole. She's amazing. She's one of my favorites.
Yeah. I haven't read that.
Here's the cover. Damn. By the way, this will be on YouTube.
Yeah, if you're listening to this on audio right now, Ryan's holding up the book. It is a black book. It has a donkey.
Yeah, no. So I remember I interviewed her in 2016 about her book Fanny Says, and one of the questions was about simile specifically, and we geeked out about simile for like a while, like too long, right? And the way that she captures such like a solid image, I think the opening line, which I have to share, is ears like sugar scoops. And I'm like, solid.
Yeah.
And if someone came to me and was like,
I'm like, wow.
And and I'm like, if someone came to me and was like, hey, I'm gonna write a book about donkeys,
Right.
I'd be like, great.
Uh-huh.
Like solid, right? But of course, and I think that's something that also stands out to me too with writing is when there's such a clear concept, when it's not about, someone's entire life and it's about a very clear, focused thing.
Correct. Yeah.
One incident, one thing, one person, one moment, that's where it shines. So
would you say that the book is about donkeys? Is it really like just about donkeys? Or is it maybe about something else?
There's more.
Yeah.
There's more.
What should I
I'll
ask?
leave that. No, I'll leave that little flavor. Yeah, exactly. What about you? What have you been reading?
I just finished this. I also have it right here actually at my desk. I just finished it yesterday. It's called Morning, Noon, and Night by Spalding Gray. Have you ever read this? Have you ever heard of him?
No.
I never read him before, but I've heard his name thrown around a bunch of times by some writers I like. He did like stage monologues, but they were autobiographical, basically memoir, like short books. But he did them as stage memoir and then obviously they put him into books as well. This one was like, I think the last one he did. It's called Morning. Did I say that? It's called Morning, Noon, and Night. And it's like he accidentally becomes a father again, like in his 50s.
Oh wow!
And it's kind of just like it's a day in the life book basically, where he like wakes up, does the stuff throughout the day, and then like it ends with him basically going to sleep. But I really like the form of it. I don't know how much I like him. Not even as a character. I don't mean like I don't like the character.
Yeah.
There's something about him I don't love, but it's not that I don't. I don't know. It's very hard to pinpoint what he's almost like. He's got almost a kind of attitude that's very like a 50-year-old guy in the 90s who's like kind of snotty. I don't know.
Okay.
Anyway, so some of his humor is kind of like snotty or snooty humor, maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. But I don't know. I just kind of there's a certain vibe in the tone, and just like something about him I'm not in love with. But I really like the form of the book because it's kind of like he like wakes up and he does like yoga, and it's like the things he's looking at kind of set him off on these like tangents. So the book is really more about the tangents than about the things that are happening. So like he might be on a bike ride, and then like an image kind of sparks trains of thought, and then he essentially runs into white space, and then he'll pick up kind of like what happened next.
Interesting.
End of the day. Yeah, I'm definitely
kind of like a stream of consciousness.
Yeah, and like so, I mean, and it kind of wanders into a lot of different places, but ultimately kind of wanders into talking and discussing death, and like what it means or doesn't mean, I guess, to be a parent or a father. I don't know. So we keep saying, like, I feel like we keep stuttering around like autobiographical nonfiction or like
here we go.
Some kind of term. So
let's do this.
There's there's really like it's so easy, it's so hard to label. I kind of think
I know
what this magazine is to just be like, we take autobiographical writing, and like that means a lot of things, but it's also not telling you that much, because that can be like any different kind of form or any different kind of genre can be autobiographical. But anyway, the blanket term that I keep trying to avoid saying is creative nonfiction.
Cringe.
You're a hard cringer. I get
that though. I mean, I would like, I get that because, like technically my MFA is nonfiction, creative nonfiction.
Right.
But, I dropped a few poems in my thesis, right? Considered it then hybrid. But then you
Right.
look at writers when it's such a blur, like such a line. I mean, even like Ocean Vuong, right? On Earth Will Briefly Gorgeous. It's a novel, but so many things, right? If you know the author, resonate so closely to the point where, as I kind of joked about earlier, like the poem that's just dropped in the middle, like he talked about being autobiographical. So then as a reader, I start to question, well, what is true? What is not? And also, does that even matter?
Right.
I mean, when
Yeah.
you're being told a story, like, is that the point or no?
Yeah. And I would wager to say it doesn't matter. And like the
Yeah.
things I like, it's hard to tell for the most part
Yeah.
exactly what it is or isn't. But my problem with the term creative nonfiction is one, it assumes a level of nonfiction that it really isn't, because there is a fictionalization that happens anytime you write quote
Absolutely.
unquote creative nonfiction. And my other problem with it is that nonfiction means, right, anything that's not everything in the bookstore that's not fiction, which
Oh, yeah.
is just absurdly general and vague as to what that is. And typically when like are you like writing a poem about like a street sign? I don't know. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like a poem's creative and a street sign is nonfiction. So, I mean, yeah, that can be creative nonfiction, right? But I think when people use that term, they're mostly talking about autobiographical
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
kind of work, or work that is in some way self-reflexive. So, anyway, my problem with the term is that it's the two most vague descriptors trying to describe something, where it's like, oh, it's creative. What is that?
And yeah.
I mean, like any piece of nonfiction, were you going to tell me like a cookbook's not creative? Like
Oh,
there's no
absolutely. I was
creativity
just
went into
thinking
that? Like,
cookbook. Yeah.
or whatever, or like a work of, even like a work of philosophy or like theology, I guess. Like,
But even some like science books now are super
right.
like creative in like their approach to things.
Yeah.
Like, so
We need a
yeah, no,
better
I get that.
term, but no term is really good. But I guess that's just kind of the game when you're categorizing and
Yeah.
selling
Trying to
shit.
label.
Yeah. But anyway,
I don't know.
I'm wholly unsatisfied with the term. And
I get
I
that.
don't like I'll use it because it's like, it's what people use, and it's kind of a shorthand to be able to talk with people you don't know that well about, kind of like what you, what you're into. And like if I
Yeah.
submit somewhere, I might be like, this is a work of like brief CNF. But it's like I
Yeah.
just don't, I don't
And
know.
also I feel like what you said before too, like cross genre, like so many things are rooted in that. Like the idea of creative nonfiction.
Hmm.
And so like I know that we both have backgrounds in writing different things.
Yeah.
So like I'm thinking approach wise, like when I sit down to write a piece,
Hmm.
like sometimes I have like this thematic idea that I want to approach, like something very, very large, or I go to one specific scene, moment, image, thing from my past that I really delve into and get out. And the process is very different,
Yeah.
when I want to do that. So I'm thinking like when you sit down to write a poem, short story, or essay,
Hmm.
like, is there a big difference there?
Yeah. I haven't written fiction in so long, so it's kind of, it's
Yeah.
hard to say. For that, I mean, as you know, that's what my background was in, until I just took a hard turn from it. And like, maybe one day I'll write it again, but I just don't think I have
Yeah.
it in me. And creative nonfiction
Yeah.
is maybe a little more natural to me right now in my life. And like, anyway,
Mhm.
um, when I was doing fiction, I think my process was more like, I didn't, I don't think I outline anything. I'm trying to think if I do ever really, maybe later in a project, sometimes I might kind of start messing around with outlines, but I don't really use them or stick to them. But with fiction, I'd kind of like start something, and it's usually like where I think is the beginning, which usually never ends up as the beginning, and then just write a little bit and find a stopping point where like I know what I'm going to do next. This is like a classic thing people talk about doing.
Yeah.
And then kind of going away from then the next day coming back and just kind of like keep going in the story. And I typically, I think, would work linearly, unless like I figured out a scene and just kind of jumped ahead and then would like go back. But I typically did it like that. Poems, when I do them, are more like I have an idea and then I'm just gonna draft a ton of I write a first draft of a poem is like I want to say 5 to 10 times longer than it's going to end up as, because I'm just trying to get a bunch of stuff out and a bunch of ideas kind of and just get it on the page.
Yeah.
And then I'll look at it, and then like each draft I'm just stripping and stripping and stripping and stripping until I figure out kind of like what is there.
Yeah.
And then with nonfiction, is a little bit like that, because I approach it so fragmentarily, where I don't work on it like fiction, because typically the CNF
Yeah.
that I do is not narrative based, where it might do like anecdotes and like little fragments of narrative, but that I move them around and kind of figure out the locations for things. So with that, I feel like with the nonfiction stuff, I'm like constantly taking notes and journaling and like drafting throughout the day, and I don't necessarily entirely know what I'm doing. And then I do that enough, and then I kind of start to figure out, like from one piece, I might end up getting a few pieces. Because like, I'm not really, or like I think I'm working on one piece, but I'm just doing all sorts of stuff. I have no idea what I'm doing, and then after some time, I kind of start to see. It's almost a combination of the way I do the fiction, and I never realized that until maybe I'm saying that now. But
Yeah.
it's just more chaotic and fragmentary and almost random, and I think maybe that's why I like it the most.
So we're totally opposite.
I do know that I do know about us that I am an overdrafter and then cut guy, and
Yeah.
like write perfect poems or whatever.
Okay, so no, first of all, no. Second of all, I feel like I'm so in my head that I think so much before anything even goes on the page, that where I think, and I save it, and I'm thinking of like a word choice, and then I put it down, and then I look at it on the page, and then I determine, okay, do I continue, or I get stuck on sentences. You know what I mean? Like I write a sentence and then I immediately edit.
Right.
As opposed to writing an entire essay or story and then going back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what that says. I don't really want to know. But
there's a level of that for me previously, and it was mostly in fiction, oddly enough.
Really?
Where the poem stuff, I'm just like, I know I'm gonna revise this a million times anyway, so let me just
Wow, I'm so opposite with that. Like where like the poems, I'm just like, okay, like I got this. I try it out and I like rearrange a few things. But with like fiction or even nonfiction, I'll really go back, and even like once I type it out, and I'm doing this now currently. I'm working on this piece where it's kind of half fiction, half nonfiction. It's about this serial killer who is in my hometown back in like the 70s, and like how I grew up hearing about these stories and what that means. And so I'm kind of serializing some of the older aspects of the story, and I'm working on the nonfiction of my personal side to it. And that I'll type out, I'll even handwrite different drafts of it, and then I'll retype it. So it's almost like 3 editing processes in one.
Yeah.
And then get it out there.
Yeah, that sounds insane to me.
Yeah, see, I don't know.
But it only sounds insane to me because I'm like, I wish I was like that.
Yeah.
But I'm like,
no, but like
I'm
same
trying
with
to be
you.
so like, I'm like, I don't know, I'm like an efficiency junkie.
Yeah, I get that.
But at the same time, that's kind of a bullshit thing to say, because I overdraft, which is not efficient at all.
Yeah, I'll never forget like the days of like you drafting and like, okay, I'm gonna send this to you today, right? And like the next morning at like 7 a.m., hey, I got a new draft. Just kidding.
And then like 10 drafts later, I'd be like, it's really great to have someone to just send a draft to, and then that way it forces me to look back at it and then be like, no, this isn't ready. So it's like
Yeah,
you're
I'm like,
giving me feedback without even looking at it. I'm like, in my head, I'm gonna like imagine what Ryan's gonna say about it, and it probably has nothing to do with what you're gonna say about it. Just that I'm trying to think about it as you would think about it, and I'm like, okay.
well, I mean, sometimes I'm like, okay, you send me this draft. I'm gonna give you 24 hours to get a text.
You really
of, like,
need to make some like if I send you something, it needs to sit for like a week.
Oh, absolutely. Because then in like 7 days, I'll get something completely different.
Oh no, because after I send it to you an hour later, I'm like, oh my god, he thinks it sucks and he's afraid to get back to me.
Okay, so this is a whole other conversation.
Meanwhile, you're at work.
Yeah, exactly.
I know you're at work and you have no time to look at this.
I'm like, I'm grading.
Oh god, he looked at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Said, you know what it is? It's this fourth paragraph, and then
and I'm like, that's not even noted on my edits. I'm like, this is great job. Oh geez.
Oh dear.
I have a question for you.
Yes. Okay.
This is more writerly.
Okay.
So you don't know what it's going to be. It's kind of simple though.
Okay.
So, answer. You could specify this to writers submitting work, but general question is, what is one thing that writers worry too much about and one thing that writers don't worry enough about?
Wow.
I'm curious on your take with this. Take your time.
What do they not worry enough about?
And what do they worry too much about?
Do you have an answer?
I don't.
You want to see who comes up with one first, and then?
Well, my thing, I immediately go to submission.
Okay.
And I think about like thinking too much about what magazines or publishers want.
Mm-hmm.
But that sounds so like cliche versus your own voice, I feel like.
Okay. No, I see what you're saying.
Right. Like, I feel like that's a little much. But I almost wonder if people wouldn't be so tied down by form.
Okay.
If they didn't worry about that. Like, what would a form or a genre or whatever hybrid look like if you weren't worried about publishers or a magazine specifically? You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
That's what I come up with.
Interesting. Maybe along with that, I would say they worry too much about getting published and not whether the piece is ready. And I say that as someone who's guilty of that.
Oh, absolutely.
At times, for sure. Like,
same.
It's so hard to know when a piece is ready, though. Sometimes I don't know when a piece is ready until I basically do what I do with you. I submit it and I go, and then the next day I go, you know what? That wasn't ready.
Delete. Is a piece ever ready? That's another question.
Sometimes.
Too real.
I don't know. Sometimes.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, everything can be.
I just had that thought. I was working on my little piece today, and I'm like, what's one thing that I worry too much about versus not enough? And is there an answer?
Like, I don't know. It kind of depends what you're doing too.
Yeah.
Like, now that I don't really do work that is really image based, I guess. Like, I don't really think about it as much anymore. Like, I do think about my sentences quite a bit, but not like I did when I was writing fiction in a way. Or it's like I cared the same amount, but it's like I was looking for different things when I was editing my sentences, whether it was in creative nonfiction or fiction. And it's not because I think in one it's more or less important than the other. I think it's just like what I happen to do in the more non-fictional form. I think because it's not really as image-based, it could easily escape me sometimes. Sometimes I find where the image goes in like the paragraph, because I do feel like each paragraph needs like at least of mine. Like I want something good there for the like of
Well, yeah,
something.
I was gonna say, like, don't sell yourself short. Like, I feel like there are solid images.
Oh, what? Thank you. Right.
I
I was
just
not
say that.
fishing.
Like,
I'm not
getting
fishing.
that out there.
I'm not fishing. But I guess
I'm
it's
like,
the different. Maybe they're somewhere in there, but I don't think about them anymore.
okay,
Is
that
that
makes
weird?
sense.
And like I do
No,
think
that makes
like
sense.
sometimes when I'm editing, I can miss it. I can easily miss a spot where
Sure,
like I can change the style of the sentence to be a little more imagistic.
that makes sense.
I don't know. Whereas before, I think I over obsessed about it and then like couldn't finish the story.
There goes that genre again. Absolutely.
That's all I got. I don't know. What do you think?
Is that it? I'm good.
Are you good?
I'm solid.
It's just gonna be like one of those things where I end it and then I call you in 5 minutes. I'm like, oh, I knew, you know what?
Can we redo
I
it?
forgot to. There's something I forgot to say.
No.